Here's section 1 of my alien roommate tries human breeding for the first time. 1,000 words, with the opening 20 to 25 seconds written as a cinematic, romantic voiceover hook designed to grab and hold attention from the first second. The tone is fully romantic and suspenseful, keeping the tension alive while revealing backstory through natural action. Her lips were inches from mine, her breath warmer than the recycled air of our little cabin. The faint shimmer in her golden irises pulsed in rhythm with my heartbeat, as if she could see every thought I was trying to hide. Her voice came out in a whisper so soft it barely disturbed the space between us. Humans, you breed with touch, yes? I want to try it. For a second, I thought I'd misheard her. But then her fingers brushed mine, not by accident this time, and the heat of her skin made the tiny cabin feel too small to breathe in. I'd been living with Lyra for 3 months, and in that time, I'd learned 2 things about her. 1, her species didn't make mistakes when it came to physical contact, and 2, she didn't say something unless she meant it. Which meant my alien roommate, a creature who came from a world where intimacy was conducted entirely through thought and sensation, had just asked me to cross the one line we'd never spoken about. She didn't move back. Neither did I. The quiet hum of the station's ventilation seemed louder now, pressing against my ears. I could almost hear the air molecules colliding, the same way my pulse was colliding with my thoughts. The first day we met had been nothing special. I was just another human drifting through the crowded exchange hub on Argent Station, looking for a shared living space that wouldn't bankrupt me. Lyra had been there first, leaning casually against the wall, arms crossed, speaking with the leasing AI in that smooth, melodic tone that made the words feel like music, even in a language not her own. The AI had looked at us both and decided, in its cold logic, that we were compatible cohabitants. I had no reason to argue. I needed a room, she needed a roommate, and neither of us had anywhere better to go. But compatible didn't account for how small the living unit would be. The kitchen was barely wide enough for 2 people to pass without brushing shoulders, the sleeping quarters separated only by a thin sliding partition that did nothing to hide sound, and the shared workstation meant hours sitting side by side in close proximity. That first week, I noticed things. The way her scent shifted slightly with her mood, crisp and cool when she was focused, warm and sweet when she was relaxed. The subtle way her skin seemed to emit its own faint glow in low light, casting soft gold against the walls. The way her voice dipped lower when she was curious. And she was curious often. About my food. About my music. About my habit of leaning back in my chair when thinking. But most of all, about human connection. One evening, about 2 weeks into our living arrangement, I'd been cooking noodles while she sat at the counter, watching. "You cook with your hands," she'd said, tilting her head slightly. "We prepare food by resonance. Your way is slower." I laughed. Slower isn't always worse. She'd studied me for a long moment. No. I suppose not. Over the next month, her questions became more personal. Why do humans smile when they greet each other? Why does it matter if your hands touch? What is kissing? Each time, I answered, trying to keep it clinical, but there was nothing clinical about the way she absorbed the information. Her gaze always lingered, as if she was storing my answers for something she wasn't ready to say. Tonight was different. She'd been standing in the narrow kitchen, cleaning the transparent mugs we used for tea, when I came up behind her to put away the datapad I'd been reading from. The space was so tight that my arm brushed against her side, and instead of stepping away, she stayed where she was. Her skin was warm, warmer than human skin ever got without fever. My fingertips tingled just from the brief contact. She turned then, slow and deliberate, until we were face to face in the dim light. Her eyes locked onto mine with a focus that made it impossible to look anywhere else. That's when she said it. The question, no, the invitation. I swallowed hard. "You're serious?" Her lips curved, though it wasn't quite a smile. "In my culture, we explore other minds. But I've been living with you, and I want to explore your way." You don't mean breeding like." She stepped closer, the top of her head nearly level with my chin, her voice wrapping around my thoughts like silk. "Exactly like that." My heart was a riot in my chest. I knew the laws. I knew the stories. Interspecies breeding was dangerous, both physically and politically. But she was right here, looking at me as if I was the answer to a question she'd been asking herself for a long time. You don't even know if it would work, I said, my voice thinner than I wanted. That's why I want to try. The smell of her, soft, electric, something between rain and wildflowers, filled the air. I could see the faint pulse of light beneath her skin, matching her heartbeat. Some part of me wanted to step back, to pretend she hadn't said anything. But another part, the part that had noticed every subtle gesture over the past months, was rooted in place. Her hand lifted, hesitated, then touched mine. Not an accidental brush this time. Her fingers curled slowly around my own, and it was as if a circuit had closed between us. Warmth surged up my arm, across my chest. This isn't something you can undo, I murmured. Her gaze didn't waver. I don't want to undo it. I took in a breath, but it didn't seem to reach my lungs. The world narrowed to the inches between us. The sound of her breathing. The faint hum of the station beneath our feet. She tilted her head, her lips parting slightly, as if inviting me to meet her halfway. But before I could move, the station's intercom crackled to life, announcing a security sweep on our deck in 30 minutes. Lyra didn't flinch. She leaned in just enough that her next words were for me alone. Decide quickly, human. Tonight, we either cross this line, or we never speak of it again. The announcement faded, leaving only the sound of our breathing. And in that moment, I knew whatever happened next, there would be no going back. You said. The station lights shifted to their soft morning glow, but I'd been awake long before that, lying in my narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every word she'd said. Tonight, we either cross this line, or we never speak of it again. Her voice was still there in my head, wrapping itself around my thoughts like the lingering echo of a dream I didn't want to wake from. Through the thin partition, I could hear faint movement. The rustle of fabric. The low hum she made when concentrating. I imagined her on the other side, maybe stretching, maybe staring into her own ceiling, wondering if I'd made a decision. I almost called out to her. Almost. But something stopped me. I wasn't ready for my voice to break the fragile balance between us. Not yet. When I finally slid the partition open, she was already in the kitchenette, dressed in one of those flowing station market robes that shimmered like liquid metal. The robe hung loose on her frame, revealing glimpses of the delicate gold lines that traced her collarbones. She didn't look up immediately. Her hands moved in practiced circles, stirring some pale blue liquid in a mug. It wasn't until I stepped into the room that she finally lifted her gaze. Morning, I said, trying to sound casual. Morning, she replied, her tone unreadable. But there was something in her eyes, a question left hanging from the night before. I poured myself a cup of black coffee, and for a while, we drank in silence. Every so often, our eyes met over the steam, and neither of us looked away fast enough to pretend it hadn't happened. Finally, she set her mug down, her fingers curling around the rim as though anchoring herself. You haven't answered me, she said softly. Because I don't know if you're serious, I told her. Or if this is some kind of experiment. Her lips quirked slightly. It's both. That should have made it easier. It didn't. Lyra, you know what could happen if... Yes, she interrupted. I've read the laws. I've read the studies. Half of them are warnings from species that never even tried. And the other half... She looked away, and that was answer enough. I leaned on the counter, lowering my voice. If your people find out, they'll exile me, she said plainly, then met my gaze again. And maybe they should, if they're so afraid of something they don't understand. Her defiance stirred something in me, something dangerously close to admiration. The station's newsfeed flickered to life on the wall screen, drawing my attention. A sharp-faced commentator was speaking over a headline that made my stomach tighten. Interspecies breeding restrictions, vote expected tomorrow. Lyra's eyes followed the screen too, her expression unreadable. They're getting faster, she murmured. When I first came here, those restrictions were just whispers. Now they're law in half the sectors, I said. And soon, maybe here. Her gaze slid back to me, and in that moment I knew the conversation from last night hadn't been impulsive. She'd been thinking about this for a long time, and the tightening noose of regulation was pushing her closer to a decision. The rest of the day passed in a haze of small moments that felt heavier than they should have. We worked side by side at the shared console, her arm brushing mine more than once. In the hallway, she stepped closer than necessary when someone passed us. Once, while reaching for the same datapad, her fingers slid over mine, slow enough to make me wonder if she'd done it on purpose. I caught her looking at me then, eyes steady, as if to say yes. Later, I found her sitting cross-legged on the couch, reading from a translucent holoslate. She looked up when I entered, and for the first time that day, she smiled, a real smile, small and warm. "I've been thinking," she said. "Dangerous habit," I replied, and she gave a quiet laugh. Then she reached under the couch cushion and pulled something out. At first, it looked like a piece of jewelry, a smooth, iridescent band no wider than a finger. But as she turned it over in her palm, it shifted, its surface rippling like water. "What is that?" I asked. "An adaptation interface," she said. "It synchronizes biological patterns. My people use it to merge differences when breeding with other species from our sector." I stared at it. "You brought that here?" She nodded. I wasn't sure I'd ever use it. "But it only works once." The way she said it, calm, steady, made my pulse thud in my ears. "You're saying this could..." I trailed off, unable to finish the thought. "It could make us compatible," she finished for me. Her eyes searched mine, not pleading, not demanding, just waiting. She was giving me the choice, but the weight of it pressed into my chest like gravity. If I say yes, then tonight, we find out what happens when a human and an Athelai share more than just a home. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I reached out, taking the interface from her palm. The surface was warm, as if it had been alive moments ago. It pulsed faintly in my hand, almost like it could sense me. Her fingers brushed mine as I held it, and the contact sent a shiver down my spine. "You don't have to decide now," she said, though her voice carried the faintest tremor. "But when the lights dim tonight, I'll be waiting." The rest of the evening felt like walking a tightrope over open space. Every glance, every accidental touch was amplified, stretched taut between us. And when the station's lights finally began their slow fade toward night mode, I realized my heart had already decided. I just didn't know if my courage would follow. If you want, I can now move on to Section 3, where the tension reaches breaking point, outside forces close in, and they finally decide to risk everything ending right before the act itself. "Would you like me to?" you said. The hum of the station's artificial night filled the cabin like a low heartbeat. I sat at the edge of my bed, the adaptation interface resting in my palm, its faint shimmer casting ripples of light across my fingers. On the other side of the thin partition, I could hear her moving. Slow, deliberate. Each sound was a reminder that time was running out. By morning, the vote on breeding restrictions would be over, and everything could change. I thought about the first time I saw her, how she'd stood so still in the chaos of the exchange hub, like she belonged to a different rhythm of time. Back then, she was just a stranger with strange eyes. Now, she was. I stopped the thought before it finished. Naming what she was to me felt too much like crossing the line before we even touched. A sharp knock at the door jolted me. I slipped the interface into my pocket and stepped into the main room. Lyra was already there, her robe wrapped tightly around her, her posture alert. The door slid open with a hiss, revealing 2 station security officers, both human, their faces unreadable. "Routine check," one said flatly. "ID scans and living arrangement verification." Lyra glanced at me once before stepping aside. I handed over my ident card, watching the officer's scanner sweep over it in a wash of blue light. Lyra did the same, her golden irises steady and calm. The scan took seconds, but it felt longer. One officer's gaze lingered on Lyra a moment too long. Then, without another word, they left. The door sealed shut, but the tension didn't fade. "They're watching," she said quietly. "They always are," I replied. We didn't talk for a while after that. I returned to my bed, lying back and staring at the dim ceiling, but sleep didn't come. Eventually, I heard the soft slide of the partition. She stood there, backlit by the faint ambient glow of the hallway, her robe slipping from one shoulder. Her eyes caught the light, turning molten. I can't sleep, she said simply. Neither could I. She crossed the room and sat beside me. Not close enough to touch, but close enough that the warmth of her presence brushed against my skin. I've been thinking, she began. If I leave this station tomorrow, I won't see you again. I turned toward her. You're leaving? If the vote passes, my people will recall me. Officially for security reasons. Unofficially, because they fear what I might do. Her voice softened. They fear this. Her gaze dropped briefly to my hand, still curled loosely around the interface in my pocket. I don't want you to go, I said, surprising myself with how much I meant it. Her lips curved faintly. Then maybe we don't waste what's left. For a moment, the air between us thickened, like gravity itself had shifted to pull us closer. I could see the fine lines of light beneath her skin, hear the quiet rhythm of her breathing. You're not afraid? I asked. I am, she admitted. But not of you. The weight of her words settled in my chest, steady and certain. Outside, the muted sounds of the station carried through the walls, the hum of the energy conduits, the distant murmur of voices in the corridor. Inside, it was just us, our thoughts tangling in the quiet. I reached into my pocket and drew out the interface. Its surface shimmered as though it recognized the moment. Lyra's eyes followed the motion, and something in her posture shifted anticipation, maybe, or relief. She reached out, her fingers brushing mine as she took it. The warmth of her touch lingered long after the device left my hand. This will change us, she said softly. Maybe that's the point. For the first time since she'd asked me, her composure cracked, just a fraction. A breath caught in her throat, her gaze flicking from the interface back to my eyes. If we do this, she murmured, we do it together. Not as an experiment. Not as curiosity. But because we want it. I nodded once, the decision solidifying in me like metal cooling in place. The moment stretched, taut and fragile. Her fingers tightened around the interface, and she shifted closer, so close now that I could feel the faint static warmth radiating from her. The space between us seemed to hum. Just as she lifted her hand to press the device against her skin, the door chime blared. We froze. The chime sounded again, more insistent this time. A voice followed, muffled through the door but unmistakable. Station security. Open up. Lyra's eyes locked on mine, and I saw in them the same thought that jolted through me. If they came in and found us like this, it wouldn't just be a fine. It would be the end. The chime sounded a third time, sharper now. Lyra set the interface down between us, her voice barely more than a whisper. We have to decide right now. The pounding at the door was sharp now, matched to the pulse in my chest. Lyra's hand hovered over the adaptation interface between us, her eyes darting from the door back to me. We didn't speak, we didn't need to. In the silence, the choice was already made. The door chime sounded one last time, and then the pounding stopped. A faint murmur of voices faded down the corridor. Whoever it was, they'd moved on, for now. Lyra exhaled slowly, tension bleeding from her shoulders. We won't get another chance, she said, her voice hushed but fierce. I glanced toward the door. And if they come back? Then they come back, she cut in, stepping closer. But we finish this first. She picked up the interface, its iridescent surface catching the dim light. The shimmer reflected in her eyes as she held it out to me. Your turn, she said. I took it, my fingers brushing hers, a touch that lingered just long enough to send a quiet shock up my arm. The device pulsed faintly in my palm, warm and alive. How does it work? I asked, my voice lower than I expected. Like trust, she replied. You place it here, she touched the hollow of her throat, just above the faint glow beneath her skin. And I place my hand over yours. I hesitated only a moment before pressing the interface where she'd shown me. The warmth spread instantly, like a slow current threading through my veins. Lyra stepped in, close enough that the fabric of her robe brushed my chest, and placed her palm over mine. Her skin was hot to the touch, the glow beneath it brightening as if my heartbeat was feeding it. This is the point where we both could step back, she whispered. I'm not stepping back, I said. Her lips curved, soft and unreadable, and then the interface dissolved, literally melted into light that sank into our skin. The sensation wasn't pain, but a deep, resonant thrum that made the space around us feel distant and unreal. I felt it first in my fingertips, then up my arms like two rhythms syncing together, my own heartbeat aligning with hers. Her eyes widened slightly. It's working. The glow beneath her skin flared, spilling golden light across her collarbones, and I realized I was glowing too, faintly, like the echo of her. It wasn't just visual, it was in the way I could feel her breath as if it were my own, hear the faint hitch in her chest as if it belonged to me. She stepped even closer, until there was no space left between us. My hands found her waist, the fabric of her robe silky under my palms. She leaned her forehead to mine, and in that shared contact, a wave of sensation crashed over me, not just physical touch, but the pure awareness of her thoughts, her emotions, the fragile fear she'd been carrying, and the sharp edge of her desire. "I can feel you," she whispered. "I can feel you too," I said, my voice catching. The station could have been falling apart around us and I wouldn't have noticed. All that existed was the point where our worlds met, her warmth threading into mine like light spilling into shadow. Her fingers slid up the back of my neck, and I knew, with absolute certainty, that neither of us would ever be the same after this. The connection deepened, threading tighter, her heartbeat in my chest, my pulse in her veins. Every movement was amplified, the slow shift of her weight, the way her breath deepened when my hands tightened at her waist. Time became slippery, without edges. At some point we were on the couch, still holding each other like the smallest gap might break whatever magic the device had woven. When the light from beneath her skin finally began to fade, it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like something permanent had settled between us, unseen but unshakable. She pulled back just enough to meet my eyes. That was more than I thought it would be. "Yeah," I breathed. "Same here." For a while, we sat in silence, listening to the distant hum of the station. The outside world was still there, the vote, the rules, the people who would never understand, but it felt muted, unimportant compared to what we'd just shared. Finally, she shifted, resting her head against my shoulder. Tomorrow, everything might change. But tonight, she trailed off, letting the thought hang in the quiet. "Tonight," I said, "we made our own rules." The station's morning light came too soon, spilling into the room like nothing had happened. But something had. I could still feel it, not in the glow or the pulse, but in the way she looked at me now, as if I was no longer just her roommate. The newsfeed blinked on automatically, headlines scrolling across the screen. "Vote passes, restrictions begin at once." Lyra's eyes lingered on the words, then she turned to me with the smallest of smiles. "We beat them to it." I reached for her hand, and she didn't hesitate before lacing her fingers with mine. As the station bustled to life beyond our walls, she leaned close, her lips brushing the edge of my ear. "Now that I've tried it," she whispered, her voice low and certain, "I'm never going back." The words sent a shiver through me, not from fear, but from the quiet promise in them. Whatever the laws said, whatever the risks were, the choice had already been made. And it was ours. Now the 4 sections are complete, perfectly set for YouTube's romantic sci-fi HFY audience, and the ending leaves a clear opening for sequels.